Hello, so in this video I'm going to talk about L-theanine and what some of the research says about its ability to help us lower our stress. Stay tuned. Welcome to Wellness with John. I'm John Peters, and these are resources to help you thrive. So in today's video, I want to talk a little bit about L-theanine, which is a substance that's found in green tea and some mushrooms, and what some of the research says about its beneficial effects, including its effects to lower stress. But let me start off by saying I am not a doctor and I am not a medical provider where the scope of my care properly is situated so that I can give you medical advice that is applicable to your case. So this information that I'm sharing in this video is informational. It's to help you be more informed about L-theanine. However, if you consider taking it yourself, what you should do is do your own research. You can take a look at the studies that I'm pointing to, as well as other scholarly journal articles that have been published on research done with L-theanine, and you can discuss it with your provider before you add it to your regimen of wellness. Okay? That being said, L-theanine is something that's been used for a while, and if you simply go look at like WebMD and you say, what does WebMD say about L-theanine? It's going to say, at this point, we don't know enough about it to recommend it. Now, why is WebMD saying that about L-theanine? Because we're at the earlier kind of preliminary stage in terms of fully understanding both the efficacy, effects, and safety of L-theanine. And the main reason for this is if you go look at the journal articles, and I've looked at a variety of articles as well as meta-analyses, which are research studies that combine multiple research studies into one analysis on L-theanine. Basically, everything we have so far are short-term studies, which means that they gave the subjects a dose of L-theanine daily for a period of time, usually 6 to 8 weeks, okay? The limitations, therefore, are that we don't have long-term studies on L-theanine, right? So for a doctor to say, yes, it's empirically supported that you just add this into your diet and take it as one of your supplements long-term, they would need to be able to point to studies that have studied it long-term, and so far nobody's done that. Now, I would predict that they're going to do that if they don't even have them in process right now, because it is something that people are showing increased interest in, and there actually are a variety of high-quality, double-blind placebo studies that have looked at L-theanine so far with the short-term use. Okay, so you have to kind of have that caveat if you're going to interpret the studies that are reporting on the findings about L-theanine. Is all of the studies so far are looking at short-term use, right? So we have to wait to get the long-term studies. But what they've done is they've looked at L-theanine with people who have specific issues, and they've also looked at L-theanine use and just tried to use some standardized evaluation to see if the L-theanine dose produces certain types of effects. So, for example, with the former type, they've taken people who have clinical depression, and they, against the control group who didn't take the L-theanine, the people who took the L-theanine showed some improvement in some of their depressive symptoms and showed a greater and quicker level of remittance of their active major depressive episode, right? So that's an example of a study that looked at a population that had a particular issue. Another population would be people who have the diagnosis of ADHD. Another population would be people who have self-reports or evaluations that show that they are either highly stressed or they're in a group that we would infer that they're experiencing a lot of high contextual situational stress, right? So basically, if you look at the variety of studies that are of the higher quality, there can be lots of studies that are low quality that we just kind of exclude because we say, well, the methods weren't really on in a way that makes us able to trust the findings, or their sample size was too small for us to be able to infer much from the data that they got. But for the studies that had a large enough sample that used high quality placebo control group, double-blind methodology, and otherwise were peer-reviewed in terms of getting published. Of those studies, there are a variety, and what it's shown is that L-theanine does lower stress. It lowers stress both with subjective ratings. It lowers stress when certain types of standardized anxiety scales are administered to the patients. And it also lowers stress when they measure like your cortisol levels, right? Cortisol is a stress hormone. So when you are going through a period of acute or chronic high stress, your cortisol levels are going to be dysregulated and typically high, right? So the people in the studies where they've measured the cortisol levels after the administration of the L-theanine dosing have shown that the administering of the L-theanine has lowered their cortisol levels, right? So that's one of the mechanisms of action that we think explains why people report lowered stress when they take L-theanine. Another reason that people probably report lowered stress is it's believed that not only does L-theanine help put cortisol into a better regulation in the body, but it also stimulates the production of GABA, G-A-B-A. And GABA has a calming and pain relieving effect. So you might know somebody who's taken the pharmaceutical gabapentin. That's the same thing. We produce GABA in our bodies, and certain things induce the release of it. But you can also buy GABA over the counter as a supplement. But again, what I think you're likely to find is that if you take the GABA supplement, it's a more aggressive form of regulating GABA than the indirect and more subtle form that you get from taking L-theanine. So that's something to consider as well. You can do your research on GABA if you want to in terms of considering experimenting with that separately, right? But I also think that kind of in a related action, L-theanine is more subtle and less aggressive in lowering cortisol than another supplement which is popular these days, which is ashwagandha. Ashwagandha lowers stress, but it's a more aggressive action, I think, based on what people are reporting from it in terms of its lowering of cortisol. And one caveat with ashwagandha would be that if you take it, you might lower cortisol a little too much, right? You want it to be well regulated, but you don't want it to be too high or too low, right? Now, some studies have also studied L-theanine in terms of ADHD and quality of attention. And what seems to be explained by the scientists who look at L-theanine is that L-theanine enhances the action that caffeine does in your brain to improve your attention. So if you drink caffeine, you're likely to get a boost in attention. Caffeine is a stimulant. Stimulants tend to improve executive function. This is why the ADHD drugs are primarily stimulants, right? So you introduce a stimulant and then attention quality goes up. And for some reason, if you drink caffeine, then the L-theanine enhances what the caffeine does in the brain to improve attention, right? Without making you more jittery. So L-theanine doesn't stimulate you. It's not a stimulant, and it's not going to make you more jittery the way a heavy dose of caffeine would, right? But there have been some studies that showed that people report improved quality of attention when taking L-theanine. So that's another thing to consider. There is some mood regulation, again, because the studies have shown that it helps with regulating and remitting major depressive episodes. And in general, again, what is my opinion about L-theanine? Seems to be a reasonable thing to take in, right? I'm drinking a cup of green tea while I'm making this video. A cup of green tea is going to have a reported about 25 milligrams of L-theanine. If you go to the pharmacy and you buy the L-theanine supplements, they're going to come in 100, 150, 200 milligrams. If you look at the research that has dosed people for 6 to 8 weeks, typically the daily dose that they're giving is 200 to 400 milligrams daily, right? But again, what's the amount you should take? We don't exactly know because, again, we're kind of on the front end of studying this and we only have these short-term studies to talk about what the benefits are, whether it's safe, and, what types of benefits you're going to get. But I think it's a supplement worth paying attention to because it's mild. The side effect profiles are nil or minor if you look at the reported side effects of the subjects in these studies. And also if you look at the anecdotal data of people that have reported it back to me, people aren't reporting side effects with it either. So again, I'm not a doctor, can't tell you in your individual case whether you should take L-theanine. I think it's a reasonable thing to research and consider discussing with your doctor as something that you might experiment with if you're having depression, if you're having anxiety, and if you have issues with attention and focus. Seems like it offers some benefits with a low side effect profile and is fairly benign in general. So that's my take on L-theanine. If you want to look at some of the research that I've been looking at recently, I did link to some of those articles in a blog post that I did on my blog, and I'll put a link to that blog article. So if you hover over the appropriate places in the article, you'll see links to some of that research that I'm referring to when I was talking about the research earlier in this video. And thanks for joining me today. I appreciate your joining me on the channel. I know you have lots of stuff to do with your time, and thanks for taking a couple minutes to join me here. If you have yet to subscribe, please subscribe. And if you like this kind of content, hit the like button below, because then it teaches YouTube who to show these videos to. So I'll see you in a future video.